Hi, and welcome to Always Bring a Book. I'm Craig. On today's episode, I sit down with Allie Rowbottom, whose new book, Lovers XXX, just came out today. She's also the author of the memoir Jello Girls, the novel Aesthetica, and a contributing writer to Vanity Fair, Elle, the New York Times, Playboy, and a ton more. We discuss her new novel, her process, inspiration, and her upcoming book tour. I'll play a clip from the book and then roll the interview. Thanks for listening.
Jude, 18, only just. Frizzy brown hair, soft suburban features. Arms crossed across her chest, forehead pressed to the smudged window of the 492, watching miles whip by, all strip malls, wilting palm trees, and wild bougainvillea. As if the sight of so much natural beauty mixed with human mess might account for how she wound up riding the bus to Los Angeles, city of cars. Ford Woody wagons, Datsuns, Camaros. Around her, adults sat solo in window seats, absorbing the same scene, though Jude sensed they saw it different. A dull resignation to their gaze, like they knew she rolled her skirt to make it shorter, pushed her boobies up on purpose with the cross of her arms. When a red Corvette pulled alongside, lingering for a moment before accelerating, she saw it as a sign, beckoning toward an ideal future, sex and speed, though her favorite color was yellow. Graffiti in shades of purple and pink popped from gray concrete in the lowering light. Through painted corridors, up and down ramps that swooped and whirled, the bus labored. It merged onto the 101, exited on Highland, turned right, lurched to a stop. Doors swung open with a push of frisson, compression of air, and Jude stepped onto Hollywood Boulevard, a street paved with stars.
Hi, today I'm joined by writer Allie Rowbottom, who is the author of the memoir Jello Girls and the novel Aesthetica, and who has a new novel coming out on June 2nd titled Lovers XXX. Allie, for folks who may not be familiar with your work, how do you normally introduce yourself and what you write?
Oh gosh. I just normally say I'm primarily a novelist and I write some nonfiction, and then inevitably I'm asked about the subjects of my novels, and that's where things get a little funny, depending on who I'm talking to.
What's the subject of your novels?
Well, my last novel, Aesthetica, which came out in late 2022, I normally say it's a novel about a former influencer with a plastic surgery addiction. And then if people prod for more, I say the novel's told in two timelines. One is in 2017 when the protagonist, Anna, first got into Instagram. And the second is in 2035 when she's 35. I think it's 2035, and is planning to undergo this controversial surgery to reverse all of the aesthetic work she's had done and to reset her to a quote unquote natural state. And then with Lovers Triple X, it really depends on who I'm talking to. I omit the adult industry with certain people, but it really is a an epic friendship slash love story set in the early 1980s in the so-called golden age of pornography in the San Fernando Valley, and then it spans 30 years from there.
So I wasn't gonna ask you to give us kind of the light premise of that, but I guess now I wanna ask why would you omit that? And two, how could you possibly omit that? It's so central to the to the story.
I'm trying to think about who I've omitted it with. I mean, I haven't with my family or elder family members, and I haven't with my in-laws, though I might have at first, and then it just sort of slowly came out. Yeah, I think it's mostly with like people who I know I've like just encountered and not sure how they are gonna feel about pornography, which to me, especially over the course of researching and writing this novel, has just become incredibly normalized. I don't think it ever really wasn't for me, but it's going to be interesting to see how the book is received, and it's also like continually interesting to me to see the subject matter described as like difficult to people because it just doesn't feel that way to me. But any omissions I make are just sort of trying to honor the fact that for some people, pornography is upsetting.
Sure. So you don't need to admit anything here, and you sort of
Okay,
started
good.
to get into it, but I would love for you to kind of set the premise for us a little bit.
Okay.
I'm maybe like about halfway through, and I'm really enjoying it. But for folks that haven't read it yet,
Well, the novel opens in 1982, wherein one character, Jude, whose perspective the first half of the book is told from, is looking for her best friend, Winnie. They went to high school together, but had separated because Jude had been sent to reform school. So she's looking for her best friend, Winnie, and she finds her ultimately at a strip club in the San Fernando Valley called Ladies of the Valley. And from there, the two pick up where they left off, and it's sort of a quick and slippery slope into shooting pornography. And during this time period was sort of the beginning of a technological shift from um, film to VHS. And the girls sort of ride the wave of that technological change until the book splits halfway through and suddenly jumps 30 years to Winnie's perspective. And the second half of the book, Winnie is looking for Jude, who has disappeared at the end of part one.
what drew you to wanting to write this story? Because it does have some similar parallels to some of your other work around,
Uh-huh.
the themes and all that. So, like, what draws you to writing this type of story?
It's a couple things. I think I have a vested interest in sort of going deep on characters I think either haven't been given a thorough literary treatment yet, if only because they are sort of easier passed off as silly. Um, Sometimes the word like bimbo jumps to mind. Like I just feel like a deep personal mission to rectify that wrong. Um, and I think, from a personal place, I have been really interested in the gap between, others' perceptions, either of me or of other women, and what feels like the deep emotional truth of my lived experience. So, um, I'm just sort of always looking to prod at that in my fiction in particular. And with pornography, I mean, likewise, it is this sort of huge cultural mechanism that informs and feeds a lot of not just culture, but our personal lives, even if we don't use it, which most people do, but is so rarely talked about that I felt like, I mean, that always carries a lot of heat to me. And it was true in my last novel, Aesthetica, as well with plastic surgery. I just felt like, okay, this is something that like hundreds of thousands of people, mostly women, but certainly not all, are using every year, but nobody talks about it. And it's not given that sort of literary treatment. And if it does show up in literary novels, it's often just sort of a punchline.
Yeah.
So I felt like, or it's like, it's not something that a protagonist experiences. It's like a secondary character watches someone else do it and then passes judgment. And I just felt like I'm not that interested in passing judgment. I'm actually just interested in asking questions and asking the reader to just sort of think critically about something that, again, like is really easy to just sort of shrug off, but is a huge cultural driving force for good or for bad. That's up for the reader to decide.
Given how ubiquitous it is, like you said, hundreds of thousands of people are, using these things or getting these surgeries. Like, it's very, very common. Why do you think there's still such a kind of stigma around it?
I mean, it's interesting because, like, with plastic surgery right now, and this has changed quite a bit since when Aesthetica came out, but we've gone through a couple different, like, cultural phases, like, the sort of, like, normalization phase, which I would argue we're probably still in, where, like, major media outlets are like, I want, publishing first person essays about whatever plastic surgery someone has gotten. And that I think is purely capitalism. I think that with plastic surgery, I mean, there has been this sort of like, and as with many things that are sort of like gendered and at least marketed as female specific. There's this idea that like in order to conform to the beauty standard, you have to do so effortlessly. And plastic surgery really is this like, it's like the ultimate amount of effort someone can put in is
Yeah,
like to put your
seriously.
life on the line and go under the knife. And so, like, for that reason, and to uphold like that truly impossible ideal of the image standard of beauty culture, which is to be perfect but not try. It's like you could never really own up to plastic surgery, or it had to be this sort of secret thing, which again I think is changing now. But like it's just going to shapeshift into something else because like in order to make it a commodity that people strive to attain, it has to be difficult to obtain and it has to have that sort of secrecy around it. That's what makes people buy things. So um, or by surgeries, I think. And then with porn, I mean, I really don't get it. I think that sex is still shrouded for many in shame. And I think that like culturally we still have this like deep puritanical underlying thread.
Yeah, especially like in American culture in
Yeah.
general. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it's sort of like in some ways similar to the plastic surgery thing, but it's like, you know, as a woman in particular, like I walk around and I see women's bodies on every billboard being used to sell. But like when I'm like, I'd like to like really take a closer look at sex and our, you know, cultural conceptions of sex and how we've gotten here, it's like seen as very
It's like
taboo. But to
taboo.
me,
Like, you're
it's
gonna
just
write
like
about that?
everywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
You mentioned about, not wanting to pass judgment, but just ask questions. And it kind of leads me to think about how you did research for this book. This book is just like dripping with detail about not only that era, but Los Angeles in general. And I read that Publishers Weekly described it as an X-rated time capsule, which I thought was a perfect way to describe it. So, what was the research process like for you for this book, given the era?
That's a great question. And I will say, like, for all of my books, like the research process has felt really organic. Like I have to kind of just get obsessed with whatever I am writing about and not very hard for me to do with certain things. Like, um, but I had originally thought I was gonna write this novel as like a singer-songwriter
Hmm.
novel set in the 60s in Laurel Canyon. And the main
That's very
characters
different than where this
yes.
went. Yeah.
I know. The main characters, and this part has remained, but Jude and Winnie were based very loosely on Judy Sill, who's like kind of a lesser known singer-songwriter of that era, and Joni Mitchell. Um, but once I started getting into that world, I felt a little bored by it, honestly, which
Oh,
I think it's
interesting.
a very fascinating time period and historical moment, but for some reason, maybe it just felt too far away from like the LA I live in. Um, most of the time, I so anyway, I was like, I started that project and I was listening to Lily Analyc's podcast, Once Upon a Time in the Valley, about Tracy Lords, who's an underage adult film performer in the early 80s. And I was just like super compelled by it. And I felt like, oh, this is like, this world has like the edge that I'm looking for, especially in fiction right now, because it's hard to capture a reader's attention and it's hard to like, you know, you want to write about a world you want to spend a lot of time in. So it felt like, ooh, what if I just changed it? And I also thought the the subject of pornography in sort of a more macro sense gave me a lot of space to play with all of the subjects that I find most compelling as a writer, which I mentioned earlier. So um, it was a natural shift. And once I made that shift, I threw myself into research by listening to other podcasts. There's actually like quite a few, especially the Rialto Report by Ashley West, where like uh porn stars of yore like go deep on their backstories and life stories and what led them to their occupation and how they feel about it now and how they felt about it then, which was like it's just like an incredible resource that I used a lot. I watched a lot of adult film, from that era, which was fun.
Someone walks in,
Um,
you're like, "Get out of here, I'm doing research." Yeah.
I know my husband and I share an office. He's also a writer, and I would just be over at my desk, just sort of like streaming porn. He's like trying to work on his
It's like,
novel,
"Can
which
you
is
put
very different.
headphones on?"
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. So I went deep. There's some great. I read The Other Hollywood like 3 times, which is by Legs McNeil. It's like a great comprehensive history of that time period. And I also, I live in LA, and my husband at the time, like we had just moved to Malibu. He's a surfer as well as a novelist, and we made that move. So it's right over the hill from the valley. And I was going into the valley all the time to do errands and all that kind of stuff. So I started to like really inhabit that world of the novel in that way.
that's amazing. So obviously you've been talking a lot about Los Angeles but in both Lovers and Aesthetica, Los Angeles feels really important to not just as a setting, but like it really is part of the book. And I mean, like you said, I know you live there, but beyond that, what is it about LA that sort of pulls you in to want to write about it?
I think it's partially that I'm not from LA. I'm in New York right now, and I was born in New Haven, Connecticut, and grew up in New England. Went to college in New York. I feel like I became who I am in New York, and it's like my first home. Um, but LA, I was just thinking today, I was like, will I ever write a New York novel? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like
I was thinking the
LA
same thing
just,
earlier.
yeah,
Yeah.
LA just feels so foreign to me in many ways. And I think like having that remove has compelled me to sort of explore it from that outsider POV a bit more. It's also so, I mean, obviously it's so iconic as a setting, but it's so discordant to live somewhere where the weather is so beautiful and like unchanging. And
Yeah.
then, you have industries like Hollywood or the other Hollywood adult film that have varying degrees of darkness sort of woven into them, and that discordance is just very compelling to me, that tension.
That makes a lot of sense. So, last question about the book, but Aesthetica and Jello Girls and now Lovers all sort of explore these themes around images and bodies and the way women are perceived and observed in the world. With Lovers, you do visit some of those same themes again. And
Mm.
is that something that you were consciously returning to, or do these themes just sort of emerge naturally in your work?
I think they sort of emerge naturally. I'm aware of them in as much as like I'm aware of them like every day that I live in this body in this world. But yeah, like I think it's just sort of an organic thing that happens when I write. And I don't really foresee that changing probably. I mean, I'm open to be surprised. I have no like real horse in that race, but
Save it for your New York novel, you know?
yeah,
Yeah.
we'll see.
You write memoir fiction, but you're also like a really prolific like journalist. You've written for so many
Yeah.
amazing magazines and outlets like Playboy and Vanity Fair and Elle and the New York Times how does your process change between these different formats? Do you have a different mindset when you're going to tackle an article versus tackle say a piece of, long form fiction or I guess like what how does that look for you?
That's a great question. Thank you. It's definitely a different process. I think I sort of loathe to say this, but better at writing nonfiction of any kind than fiction. Um, there is like a fluidity. I mean, I feel like there's a fluidity to writing to me in general. Like I just really easily enter the zone, which is something that kind of has happened to me more as I've gotten older. But I find that when I sit down to write like a reported piece or even like a personal essay or something, I don't have to outline as much as I do when I write fiction. And some of that is probably like having studied nonfiction writing in my doctoral program pretty much exclusively. But it's just like the where things go and the pacing and the turns and the beats, like it all feels very, very close at hand to me. And when I write fiction, I do a lot more outlining. Um, I That said, like writing a novel, I think I don't know how people do it without outlining, but even if I'm writing short fiction, which I think is like my least strong genre or like form, I'd have to outline. Whereas if I was writing something nonfiction of the same length, I probably wouldn't have to. Um, but I really enjoy writing fiction because it's nice to get out of your own head a little bit or your own like
Yeah.
exact lived experience and get to like expand that a little bit.
That's really interesting. What do those outlines look like for you, for fiction? Like, do you have like I've seen some authors that have like a gigantic cork board with a million post-it notes. Like when you go to outline a piece of fiction, what does that look like?
I have not yet tried the like big like wall board with like string connecting things. um I use yellow legal pads and I will start out with like a a sort of macro outline that's like act 1, act 2, act 3.
Mm.
And then once I feel like I've gotten something kind of interesting there, I will map out each chapter and I'll map it out like in terms of what happens, like with bullet points, but I'll also map it out in terms of like where, like what tenor we start things in emotionally, high, low, and then where we end. And like that should always shift over the course of the chapter. So I get pretty granular with it. That said, once I start writing, things always change. So like as they do, I go back and I edit the
You have a lot of
outline.
a lot of yellow legal pads.
So many. Like
Yeah.
Lovers is like in a drawer, it's like this big,
That's
of
so
like a
interesting.
foot tall stack. And I also always write longhand when I'm in the generative page making phase. And then at the end of a writing day, I will type that into a Word doc. So it's like happening concurrently.
That's really interesting. One thing I also like about that I saw you share about your process was I think you did like a peek behind the day of writing this book and you showed some of your inspiration, like Fates and Furies by Lauren Groff and some others. And how do you use inspiration in your writing process? Like when you have all that stuff on the shelf and like, I think you said something like I like the form of this one and like
Yep.
how does inspiration come into your day to day?
Well, I mean, like a book like Fates and Furies, like when I first read that, I was like, oh, I want to do something with this two-part structure like this.
Mm.
And that I just sort of bided my time until I found the story I thought would work. So that was sort of like a more like macro inspiration, but during a writing day, like Dennis Johnson's Angels was like this for me with this book, and so was Shirley Hazard's Transit of Venus. I'll just like if I'm writing and I feel like a little like unsure or stuck, I'll pick up one of those books and look how did they make this paragraph? And usually it's just like I just open it to a page and I'm just like, okay, like something it turns something in my head and I'll be like, oh, okay, like, like I could start it with this kind of sentence structure, blah, blah, blah. Um, and I like, yeah, so it's like there's kind of like different kinds of inspos that I'll turn to, but I also like when outlining, we'll look at like those sort of like macro texts, like Fates and Furies was one, Wuthering Heights was another, Little Women was one that really influenced the ending of Lovers XXX, which
That's
you might
so
notice when
that's
you get
so
there.
interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's like it
I would
doesn't
never
have
think
to
of those
be.
2 books as yeah.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and
I'm reading
yet
it, I'm like, "Wow,
somehow
this
like
reminds me
it's
of
a book
Little
about
Women."
porn. But
Um,
yeah, so lots of different kinds of influences.
that's awesome. So, you've got a pretty exciting stretch coming up with release events for Lovers XXX in LA, London, New York, and a ton of other places, and I read that for Jello Girls, you served Jello shots at your release party, and then for Aesthetica, you had, like, a nurse practitioner offering Botox injections. So, do you
Yes.
have any exciting plans for the release of, Lovers?
Yes, I do. The release event where they will take place is May 28th. So just a couple days away, here in New York at the Box, which is a legendary burlesque theater downtown. I'm not going to give away what the performative elements are, but I'm working on something that I hope will rival the Botox. I've had a
That's
lot of people ask me. It's a tough act to
I was
follow,
gonna say that's
having
a tall
Botox on
order.
site.
That's awesome. So I just want to end with a couple of speed round questions. So these can be just off the cuff, but I saw this photo of you holding the US version and the UK version, and their covers are
Yeah,
very different. And which one do you prefer?
honestly, the US.
Interesting. I really liked the UK one.
Okay.
They're both
See, but
they're
like
both
I
good.
think they both work, like
Yeah,
they
yeah.
both speak to different readerships in some way.
What would be the best city to write about that isn't Los Angeles?
New York.
That I almost didn't ask this question. I was like, well, we kind of already talked about this.
I've also enjoyed writing about Houston, so
Oh, that's
uh,
interesting.
yeah,
Writing in silence or with background noise?
silence.
All right, and both you and your husband are novelists, like you said.
Mhm.
Whose desk is cleaner?
Mine, definitely.
I like that you had to add the definitely there. And then last, what is your favorite way to kill time in an airport?
Honestly, this sounds so like type A, but writing.
You always have to bring your, like, suitcase full of yellow legal pads to the airport.
Luckily, by that point, hopefully I'm on my laptop. But yeah, having like a deadline in an airport is the best because the time passes so quickly.
I'm also a worker at an airport 100%.
Nope.
Um, so we're right at time, so I just wanted to give you a second to tell listeners about, the book and where they can get it, and if there's anything else we should be expecting for you in the, coming months and
Ooh, I think after this I'll be taking a little bit of a break. But yes, Lovers Triple X. It's coming out June 2nd in the US and June 4th in the UK. And I think you could be able to get it anywhere you get books. And I loved writing it. It feels like the book of my heart and soul, even though I am not an adult performer. But I had so much fun working on it. It was just a beautiful writing experience, and I hope that comes through in the book itself.
that's awesome. Well, we'll be rooting for you as it comes out, and, good luck with all your events. I can't wait to hear about what you end up doing, so
Thank you so much.
awesome, thank you. Thanks for listening to that episode, everyone. Make sure you go grab Lovers XXX from your local bookstore today. I actually walked by mine on the way in here and saw it right in the front window, so super exciting. So happy pub day to Allie. You're all in for such a treat with this one. Obviously, that's my main recommendation for today, but I also wanted to recommend a new book from Philippe Besson called The Summer Boy. He's the author of one of my favorite books ever, Lie With Me, and I was so excited when a new one came out. It is a beautiful book. It's set in the summer of 1985 on a resort island off the coast of France. 6 teenagers, 5 boys, and 1 girl band together for a final golden season before adulthood. Their days are drenched in sun and freedom, and their nights simmer with secrets, jealousy, and longing. Philippe is drawn to Nicholas, the quiet new boy who sees him in a way that no one else does. As their bond deepens, part of Nicholas remains unreachable, and then a sudden tragedy brings everything to a brutal end. I am only about a third into this, and the writing is just chef's kiss. I love this author. It is a translated book from French, and honestly, it's just as the title suggests, it is a lovely book for the summer. So go grab The Summer Boy by Philippe Besson and also Lovers XXX by Allie Rowbottom. Until next time, thanks for listening.